who have been participating all week. You have seen lots of presentations. There were several on books, different types of presentations. So I'm glad you've come on over for just one more. Um, Today, as she mentioned, I'm going to be talking about diverse books and how we can use them in the classroom. I am a speech language pathologist by trade, and so I've spent my time in elementary schools, mostly with pre-K to third graders, working with them, and I'm currently an assistant professor at Florida State University. You'll see here this little logo down at the bottom. I do run a website, Maya's Book Nook, that focuses on promoting language and literacy skills through diverse children's books. So my daughter has been an amazing impact in terms of me diversifying our home library. And I used to share those books on my personal social media, and people would say time and time again, I would share them during Black History Month or whenever, just kind of daily sharing books. And people would say, you really need to start a website. So I started the website, and it's really just a meshing of the things that I love: diverse books, language, literacy. So no matter that some of you are working with older kids, you'll still be able, I hope, to glean some information from this. So this is just kind of our agenda for the day to guide us. We'll talk about why diverse books matter, my personal must-haves when choosing books to use for educational purposes, dialogic reading, and storybook guides. So this is a quote that you may have heard in some form or fashion. People, when they often talk about diverse books, they talk about windows, sliding glass doors, and mirrors. But oftentimes when you see that quote, they don't have the entire thing. Have any of you can give me, just a nod or throw it in the chat if you've seen or heard a part of this quote or any portion. So thank you for the thumbs up. Perfect. So Rudine Sims Bishop, Dr. Bishop, is what we call the mother of multicultural literature for children. And so a few years ago, she made this quote or said this during a presentation, that books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, when we can see our own lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. And so I really love this quote. It's so powerful and impactful. And Simone, I'm not sure if you're recording. Are you recording already? Okay, perfect. I didn't see the little notice at the top. Perfect. I really love this quote because it really just shows that it's not just important for kids to see themselves in the books that they read, but they should also be introduced to other people, other cultures, religions. So when I talk about diverse books, while I'm Black, it's not just about Black books. Now, of course, that's what we love. That's what we have a lot of, because I do want my daughter to see herself and see another little girl with curly hair or Afro puffs, right? But we also use these books to introduce her to other cultures, children with disabilities, children who are differently abled, different holidays that we don't celebrate. All of those things can be really integral in providing children with a well-rounded foundation for them to not only see themselves, but to see other worlds. And so the Children's Cooperative Book Center from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, they always put out this list. And if you haven't seen this before, I've linked it here. They always put out this list. And Simone, if you'd like, I can make sure I share a version of this if we want to add it so that participants or attendees can view this afterwards. But when you look at it, they have this really cool list where you'll see it broken down. And you can give me a thumbs up if you've seen this list before, but they go through and provide us with actual number of books by that feature African American characters, American Indian, Asian Pacific, and Latinx. And then you'll also see by authors of color. So I love that website, right? Because it's so extremely helpful. I'll also put it in the chat for you. Um, and so there's this infographic. These are the date. This is the data from 2018, which was published late last year, August of 2019. So we should have some new data relatively soon for 2019 publishing in children's books. But what you'll see is that books featuring African American characters, while it has grown, it hasn't grown enough. Only 10%. Um, Whereas books that feature white characters, 50%. And then when you look at all of these other percentages, American Indian First Nations, Indigenous 1%, Latinx 5%, Asian Pacific Islanders 7%. When you look at that all together, it still doesn't total the 27% that we see that are about animals or other things like unicorns. And I mean, my child likes unicorns too, but come on. We have more books about animals and other things than we actually do about children of color. And so I want to encourage us as educators of color to ensure that when we diversify our classroom bookshelves, one, we need to ensure that our classroom bookshelves look like the students that are sitting in the seats, right? So we need to ensure we're diversifying in that way, as well with the toys, whatever other manipulatives for those of you who are special educators. If you're using Board Maker or any other kinds of things for kids who are differently abled and you're using symbol systems, we also want to ensure that we're using things that look and reflect the kids that we're working with. And so it's important to ensure that we also highlight the entirety of the Black experience, right? We don't have to focus just on on books that feature kids of color during Black History Month. We need to highlight the entirety of the Black experience and allow children to see them whole selves. We need to humanize Black people. Kids need to see other Black kids and other Black and brown kids doing things that regular kids do. Yes, our history is important, and we should also share that because we can do so much. How many of you really like to use themes in your lesson planning? I mean, as an SLP, everything was about a theme, right? I planned based on whatever my theme was for that unit. And so we want to ensure that we don't just focus on Black pain or struggle, and that we aren't also using books that feature characters that are Black or brown as dessert books, just kind of that extra thing that we throw on top. Like, no, if there's a choice between the books that I'm going to use for this lesson and one features diverse characters, I'm going to choose that one book that features diverse characters versus the one book that maybe is all over Pinterest or Teachers Pay Teachers and they have all of the resources already available. There's a really amazing article. If you just Google Black kids don't want to read about Harriet Tubman all the time. It was an op-ed by Deneen Miller in the New York Times back in 2018 that I really liked. But I think it's really important because in our field of speech language pathology, our field is very white. It's only 8% people of color in general, and only 3% that identify as African American or Black. And so a lot of times educators feel that they don't need to talk about race in class. But for those of you who do work majorly with or majorly with kids of color, you know that sometimes these things come up, right? And we know that just based on what you remember about development, especially for those of you, there are a few that are early childhood educators. We know that kids are able to begin to notice and express preferences by race as early as 3 to 6 months of age. And so as much as we want to say kids don't know the difference, kids do notice when the materials that we use in our classrooms don't reflect their lives and don't reflect the people that they know and the experiences that they have. And so I want to just kind of refresh us to ensure that we're all on the same page. When you think about language, educators often, we often have, or different types of educators often have different language or different words for the same thing, right? So as early childhood educators, speech language pathologists, and also ESC educators, we sometimes know about these language domains, right? So we have phonology. That's for those of you who are doing anything with kids under 3rd grade. Phonology is all a part of learning how to read, right? It's studying those sound systems. And I see some of you diligently taking notes. I'll ensure that you get copies of this. But yes, I do like it. I'm also, I'm also a professor, so I like to see you engaged in note taking, right? But we have that study of sounds. We have morphology, which is all about how morphemes are used, or that smallest piece of language. So versus cat versus cats. When I add on that plural s at the end, that changes the meaning, right? So understanding that small parts of language, whether it's a base word or a prefix or a suffix, changes the meaning that I'm trying to imply. Then we have syntax, which is really just grammar, the rules on how we form sentences. Semantics, which is meaning, all about vocab, right? And then pragmatics, what a lot of you are also working on in your classrooms, right? What are the social uses of language? How do I use language in different contexts, right? So I wanted to give us this overview of just language so that we are all on the same page with how we can use books to help us work on these language skills. And I want to also say that these are not skills that just need to be worked on with kids who have identified language disorders, right? Kids who are at risk for language disorders, as well as kids who are just maybe having some language delays. All of this helps. And even if it's a typically developing child, there is never anything wrong with focusing on oral language skills, which is what these 5 things are, because strong oral language skills takes you to becoming a strong reader, right? And of course, that's what we want for all of our kids. I won't even get into the data around, Black kids and our reading performance rates in that academic achievement gap. That is a whole nother presentation that we could go into on an entirely different day that would take us much longer. But for now, just keep in mind that storybook reading is super important, and we can use it in so many different ways to target so many skills. And at any point, I haven't said this yet, but if at any point you have questions, please feel free to raise your hand, throw it in the chat. I'm looking at all of the things. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. And so there is an extensive amount of research on the relationships between early language skills, so those things that I just showed on the other screen, how well you communicate with others, your vocabulary skills, your understanding of phonology, or the sounds that you make, grammar. All of those things have very strong predictive relationships with later literacy. So that's reading, writing, and spelling. So the stronger you are in those domains, the better you are when it comes to literacy. And so one of my favorite ways to target these oral language skills is shared storybook reading. So remember I said, it's like the merging of everything I love. We not only get, we target those language skills, but we also allow children to be able to see themselves in the books that you're using. You can use these books to learn about different concepts that they don't encounter in their everyday life. We've lived a lot of places in the last few years. In the last 5 years, my daughter is just 5 and she's lived in 3 states, right? Academia life. But she saw snow when we moved to Maryland. And because we'd read The Snowy Day, Jack Ezra Keats, which most people know that classic book, we read The Snowy Day. So she immediately knew how to do a snow angel. Nobody ever told her, like I never told her, get down on the ground and move your arms and legs, right? But she knew if she grabbed a stick and she tapped it on the tree, that snow was going to fall down, because she had read a book and had been exposed. Previous to that, we lived in Florida and Atlanta. So she had never actually had an experience with snow, but books allow you to do that. And so the purpose of our session today is to demonstrate how diverse books can be used effectively to target those language-based goals in your classroom. And for all of you, no matter your grade level, you have ELA standards, right? You have standards that have to meet English and language arts. And so when you look at those language domains that we've been talking about, all of those are broken down into 10 to 15 standards, right? And yes, you're so right, Tamara. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right, that there is a beauty in books for sure. And so my must-haves for when choosing a book, I like to ensure that first, the books are multicultural, right? When I worked in the schools, 90% of the students that I served were African American or Hispanic or Latinx. And so using books that feature diverse characters was a must for me. There was no other option. And so children have to be allowed to see themselves as well as be introduced to new cultures. We also want to ensure that you have unique vocabulary and sophisticated language. Give me a thumbs up if you are familiar with tier 2 vocabulary or the tiers of vocabulary. Okay, perfect. So I see a couple of head nods and some thumbs. Perfect. Um, when you have tier 2 vocabulary, those words that are more sophisticated, those words allow their vocabularies to be expanded, and it also helps them. The larger their vocabulary, the better they become as a reader. It's a cyclical and a spiral approach, right? Jatan says she loves when kids can make text to real world connections. Absolutely. And so books really allow you to do that. Of course, we need to have some story grammar components. All books that feature, just because a book features multicultural characters does not mean it's a great book for teaching, right? For educational purposes. So, or for language-based skill learn. Every book is a good book in terms of if you just want to read it, but it may not necessarily be the book that you need to bring into your classroom or your therapy setting. And then, of course, T is for 10 minutes or less. You don't want the book to take forever to read, right? And if it does take a long time, you want to ensure that you have places where you can stop. It's so important that we reread books, right? It's even though we get tired of Brown Bear, or Please Baby Please, or any of those books, you get tired of reading The Hungry Caterpillar, right? For those of you early childhood educators, you read it frontwards and backwards. But it's so important that you continue to do that, because every time you read that book, you're making those synapses in the brain, right? It's making their brain stronger. They're learning new vocabulary. They're also learning how to read themselves. So then when you see them pretending to read their books over in your library center in your classroom, you hear that inflection, right? You hear them varying their intonation. You hear them pointing to certain pictures. My daughter has recently, and that's just a link to it. My daughter has recently started doing story time on Instagram, and she absolutely loves, like seeing hearts. Because of this time and age, we've seen so many people Instagram lives. She's watched like other educators and people do Instagram lives, like dance lessons and that kind of thing. So she likes to see the hearts, and so she'll sit there and she'll wait to kind of, but when I see her read, I see her modeling all the things that I do. So she'll talk about the cover of the book, right? She's going to talk about all of those different things. She's asking questions as she goes. And so there are 3 evidence-based strategies that we're going to, that are really helpful. I'm going to skip over this part to go to focus on the one in particular, dialogic reading, that is extremely helpful for all of us, just in the essence of time. And so dialogic reading is an interactive book reading strategy, right? When you read a book, it should not be passive. The child has a role in the book, whether they're a reader or not. And I want to encourage you, all of you, even if you are in grades 3 or above, still do read alouds, because when you read aloud to a child, it frees up that cognitive capacity that they have for comprehension, right? So if they don't have to spend time decoding the words, they have more mental capacity left to actually understand what you're reading, and you get to a deeper part of reading when they aren't reading it themselves. So the crowd strategy is one that we use to remember the different types of questions to ask. How many times do you read a book to your class and you feel like you're asking the same types of questions? Am I like the only one? Like sometimes you feel like you're asking the same types of questions over and over. So I love this acronym because it allows you to ask a various amount of questions. So completion questions, recall questions, open-ended, WH of course, and my favorite, distancing questions. As Jatan said, we want to make sure that we allow kids to make connections, right? So this is just an example from the 3 Little Pigs. So we're going to extend and go beyond the actual text on the page. So how do you think the pigs felt? So we take on the feelings of the characters. But now let's go farther. Extend it to home. If you could build a playhouse at home, what material would you use? What would you do if someone was bullying you, right? And yes, Chastity, I will make sure that you have a link to it. I can actually, I'll make sure I'll put a link in the chat right before we're done. And so some examples of literacy-based instructional goals, because of course you want to know what are the things that I can actually target when it comes to ELA goals. And so you can talk about vocabulary diversity. How diverse are the words that the kids in your class know? How do you increase mean length of utterance? What that just means is ensuring that every time on average when that child speaks, how many words are they using? Do they always answer with just one or two words? How do you increase their mean length of utterance? Also, diversity in grammar, right? We want to make sure they're using more sophisticated sentences. You get those models from books because let's be honest, we read more sophisticated language than we actually use verbally, right? Unless we're doing a presentation. Pragmatics, things like joint attention, topic initiation, and maintenance, being able to tell stories themselves. Phonological awareness skills, some of these emergent literacy things for preschoolers and kindergarten students, phonics, print concepts, alphabet knowledge. Um, and so comprehension, being able to answer explicit and implicit questions, identifying main ideas and inferencing. And so, yes, Michelle, for sure, when you read those few pages from a chapter book after recess, it gives you that time to just kind of dig in, right? So one of the things that this 30 minutes goes by way too quick, I'll just say, and really we didn't have 30 minutes. We had like 22 because we chatted. So storybook guides, I love these, and I do these on my website very often, and I use them also in therapy, and you can use them in your classrooms. Beyond the book, you want to go beyond what you see, and this sample has already been provided for you. But you'll see questions. What are you going to do before you read the book, during the book, after the book? Remember how we talked about um, Tier 2 vocabulary. These are going to be words that are more sophisticated, words that they may not already know. So sashaying may be a word that's very new to a child, right? So you may want to include that. You want to do things that connect just based on what they see from the title. The Quickest Kid in Clarksville was about a little girl who was getting ready to celebrate Wilma Rudolph's Olympic gold medals. They were doing a parade. And so Google the city of Clarksville to see where it is. How far is it from where your students live or where your school is? You'll also see things to do during the story. You want to make predictions. Even if the child can read, take turns reading. There are so many things that we can do. Search for YouTube videos afterwards. What are those extension activities after you've read the book? And then you also have, because I found what works best is if you're prepared, right? So you have questions already ready, like those crowd questions that we've been talking about. Some why questions, some completion questions, etc. So what I wanted to kind of close us out on really quickly is if we were to practice, right? So most of you are familiar probably with hidden figures, right? So just really quickly, you can come off mute or put it in the chat. What are some of the types of questions we could ask in terms of crowd questions, simply about the cover of the book? What kind of questions could we ask? Any volunteers? Inferencing questions. Yep. So we could ask some inferencing questions. What's on their dresses? Yeah, I love that one. What's on your dresses? We can make some predictions and connections. What does it mean to be a hidden figure? Like, what do you think that means? What's on their dresses? Oh, it looks like math equations. What do you think this book is going to be about based on that? There's a moon in the background, right? And I never even noticed that little rocket over there. So you could go through this book. We don't have, what do you think the book will be about? Absolutely, LaDonna. You can have those conversations. And then we can think about, as we're reading the book, we're pulling out some of that vocabulary, right? Yes, that would be a completion question. The pictures on one of their dresses are or hidden, and you're waiting for them to complete it, right? We can look through and pull out what they think some of these new words mean based on the text. So I love using books for these purposes. And then, of course, we want to extend it past what we're actually doing in the class during story time. We could then say, what is our STEM lesson for the day? For art, we made galaxy jars after we read this, right? So you can extend after you read these books. And so this was really, really quick. And so to close us out, shared storybook reading has been a proven method of improving language skills of children with identified language disorders as well as those at risk. So for any of you who work with kids who may have some struggles with language or are at risk, you can for sure use storybook reading to improve their oral language skills. When we use these diverse books, not only do we target oral language and rich experiences, we also provide an authentic lens for children from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds to see themselves. And I hope that it helps to motivate students. And just as organizations like NEA have rebranded their signature programs, we're no longer talking about Seuss, right? We don't. We're talking about how we celebrate a nation of diverse readers. I hope that SLPs, other practitioners, start to embrace this change as well. And so, do you post a crowd method for children or use blended learning lessons with it based on their lessons? You can do both, Janine. So, what I've done, I keep it posted in the classroom. So, because for a lot of times with students who have language deficits, they also have difficulties asking questions, right? So the acronym can go both ways. It can be used for you to create questions to ask them or to help them actually ask questions. I've also provided an additional list of resources here for you, just a lot of different websites that focus on diverse books, where you can get books. If you are an educator, you can reach out to me in terms of if you work at a Title I school or a Head Start, you can use First Books to purchase books for your classrooms at a discounted price. And there are a lot of other resources. My information is there. I'll look for the chat for any other questions, but as I do that, I'll also post the slides for you in the chat. Any other questions for me? I know we're a few minutes over time.
Can you go back to your contact information?
I surely will. Let me just pop this link in really quickly. Okay, so this is the link to the presentation. You could just open that up, and I can be reached everywhere at Maya's Book Nook. It's Maya's Book Nook at Gmail, and everything is on the website. And thank you so much, Christian. Thank you, Jahara. If any other questions? Thank you, Simone, for, I'm sorry I went over time. Hopefully you found these as good resources, just something that you could think about as you're planning ahead in terms of diversifying your classrooms and ensuring that not only are we just using these books that feature kids of color just to kind of pacify them or as those dessert books, but we're actually using these books to target those ELA goals that they have. Thank you so much, all. Thank you for listening. And like I said, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions at any point about language or literacy or diverse books.